I'm Stephen Scheuer, welcoming you to another in our series of oral histories in which we are fortunate indeed to be able to interview those persons who have helped shape the style and substance of television and our major media today.
I'm Al Perlmutter, and I'm in Chicago today, February 13th, 2001, with a man with whom I've had the pleasure and, let's say, privilege of working in the early days of public television. Our guest virtually invented the oral history, giving voice to the voiceless, and as the press releases say, interviewing everyone from commoners to kings. For over 4 decades, he conducted a daily 1-hour radio show broadcast from WFMT in Chicago, and today he can be heard on National Public Radio. Thousands of interviews later, and a dozen or more books later, his bestsellers include Hard Times, 1970, Working in 74, Race in 1992, and the Pulitzer Prize-winning The Good War in 1985. We'll talk about those and more with our guest, Studs Terkel. Studs, you and I first worked together in 1971 and 72 on the Great American Dream Machine.
And I remember that, too.
Yeah, it was great. And your wonderful segment, Talking with Terkel, was on the shows as a regular. For those watching this interview today who may not have been born in the early 70s, let's run a clip from that series. And talking with you is a steel worker who is not crazy about his taxes going to the welfare system. But you get a word or two in edgewise.
When they pass a bill for a welfare program, you know who pays for it? The middle-class working guy. You know who gets away with it? The millionaire, baby.
Mike has raised a good point. Let's
Don't put words in my mouth.
Hey, Mike, is this putting words in your mouth? You're saying about the welfare program. And
I didn't say I was against it.
No, I know you're for it. I'm merely saying how much of your buck goes for welfare and how much goes for all those B, et cetera. Wait a minute. Hey, Mike.
Leon, am I right or
Hey,
wrong?
Mike, let me finish. You won't get me. Hey, Mike. How much of your buck is going toward the Pentagon and military? You any idea that about 75% of your buck is going to the military? And you're not questioning that. That's what I want about. You're not talking about your.
I understand that.
You're paying tax 75% or so, whatever it is, 60%. A tremendous. You don't question that. Now, why is that? Why is that?
What's what?
Why is you don't question where your big bite is going, but where your little bite is going? Why is that?
I never said I questioned either one. I didn't say I question welfare programs.
Why don't you question the
I'm
Pentagon?
all for them. I'm only against the people that don't pay. That's what I'm saying.
You know, we used to call the people in this bar in Chicago studs people. How did you get to know some of these people?
Well, it began accidentally. My whole life was an accretion of accidents. I went to Chicago Law School. I was no more cut out to be a lawyer than a man on the moon. I dreamed of Clarence Darrow and wake up to Antonin Scalia. So, no, law was not for me. There was a depression. My folks had a hotel. First, my father ran it, got sick, then my mother ran it, a men's hotel. I think that hotel was my college, really. It's not a question of anti-book. Books are important. Reading, literacy is important, but it's also wisdom of the streets, a combination of the two. That hotel were a lot of self-educated guys. Back in those days, there were a lot of single men who lived in hotels. They were either divorced, widowed, or never married, but they were skilled, they were craftsmen. My journeyman fireman retired, or a carpenter, or a skilled tool and die maker, and they had arguments, and listening to arguments and debates, even fueled by whiskey or shot or two. It was exciting. I think that played a role in my interest in the life of people we call, quote-unquote, ordinary, a word I don't like. You know, of course, ordinary people I've discovered can do extraordinary things and think extraordinary thoughts if given the chance to do so. As in the segment you just saw, there's that steelworker. His name was Mike Lavelle. He's dead now. Well, Mike would talk a great deal. Some of his, I disagreed with many of his stuff. But the woman, Anna Guerrero, who worked for would not take any guff from him. So the purpose of that program was to get them to talk, not me. I was the bartender. It's as simple as that, ran a bar. But I let them take over, now and then prod one or two. But basically, it's their speaking their mind, not being primed by a guy from Mount Olympus, TV, big shows, and the guy's honored to be on TV, and he says things. No, to be free. And basically, that was the purpose of that segment.
You know, as the guy who received the mail for the Great American Dream Machine, I remember people writing in by the hundreds, if not the thousands, saying, at last you've got somebody on television who speaks for me.
They saw themselves in it, at last. That was the whole purpose.
And I remember one was, or you had Mike who unloaded trucks.
He did. As a matter of fact, Mike was pretty wild at some of us saw. I mean, he was incredibly the anti-war kids, because he wasn't envious of them, but he didn't like the hippies. They were learned. They were book kids. He read books all the time on his own, and he felt he was being looked down upon. That was the thing. But he was very articulate. He wrote a column on labor, red, white, and blue labor, for the Chicago Tribune for a while because of that program.
Because of Suds Terkel and finding him and putting him on.
Well, he was there. He was there. See, everybody's there to be found.
Yes.
And I find riches in all these books. I'm not the author of them. I'm there. I do a lot of introductions and stuff and gathering, but their own words. They are the authors of the books.
I recall one of the people there was a house painter. Another was a retired postal worker. And Anne, I'll never forget her. In one segment of the program, you asked what they wanted out of life. And I'll never forget Anne's answer. It was, I don't never want to be bored.
And she's still around and about. She's in several of my books under other names. And she's an example. Anne is an independent woman. She's blue-collar background. We're afraid to use the word working class. You see, we've perverted the American language. We have one class, middle class. And both candidates, I'm going to talk about the last election, but all major party candidates, we must do something about the middle class. Middle class, anyway, from 20 grand to 200,000 grand. There's something called working class. It's an old-fashioned word. Well, they were working class people, you see. The Great American Depression played a big role. Sometimes people were blaming themselves because they were out of work during the Depression. And so as a result, you have a little daughter and the work they do, they become ashamed of doing. For example, I was interviewing a 15-year-old girl for the book Hard Times, and she said her father is a sanitation worker, that is a garbage collector. And I say, that is very important work. You know, Martin Luther King died in Memphis because the garbage workers were on strike for a living wage, and he went there. That's very important work. You are of the working class. She says, I beg your pardon. She was furious. I am middle class. You see, the kid assumes the same words, the jargon, you see. And so all my stuff, what I am and do also was envisioned. It came about because I also witnessed the Great American Depression and World War II. I never went outside. I was stateside, called limited service because of perforated eardrum. But while here, World War II occurred. I'm one of the living artifacts, you might say, a relic who's witnessed the Depression and World War II, and both are related. You can't separate the two. And see, the trouble is, I lose many of my friends as I get older, see. It goes with the territory. So I pick up the paper these days, you know. After scanning ahead, like, what do I read first? Not the features, not the sports, not the business, not culture, the obituaries. And you know the old doggerel that all my contemporaries know. I wake up each morning and gather my wits. I pick up the paper and read the obits. If my name's not in it, I know I'm not dead. So eat a good breakfast and go back to bed. That's an old quatrain. But at the same time, there's something missing. Frames of reference that I can make that young kids won't get. Young kids have been denied their own history. What was it like to be a kid in the 30s, seeing his father come home, a man who wants to work, and suddenly comes home 11 o'clock in the morning with his tool chest on his shoulder, meaning he was fired, and then as an idler for 10 years. What's it like to be part of that family? That same kid may have been that mama's boy in that English Channel boat in June 1944, crossing the Channel on the way to Normandy. See, well, those two events are related, you see. And so I have young friends, of course, and they're wonderful. They're witty and they're great. But there's one thing they don't have the same frame of reference I had. So a friend of mine, Charlie Andrews, who, by the way, will be very good on this program, he was a key figure in early Chicago TV and radio, wrote the Garraway show, Dave Garraway originally, and the one I was with, Stud Spice. Charlie has a story. He says, see about the old guy who married this younger woman, much younger, and the wedding was going, it went off pretty well. The marriage was pretty well, till one day he meets a friend on the corner. A friend says, how are you and Jennifer getting along? Oh, we split up. How come? She didn't know the songs. She didn't know the songs. It's literal and metaphorical. The frames of reference, you see. So these kids have been denied this. They've been told about World War II. They know about MacArthur and Eisenhower and George Patton. But what do they know about Willie and Joe? The one that was a great cartoonist of the war. Bill Malden, known for the grunts, the infantry guys. Willie and Joe, they're called. What were their lives like? Even before they went in or after. And of course, with the war, at the end of the war, came the GI Bill of Rights. And then with the GI Bill of Rights, guys went to the first one in the family to go to college. Went to college, the first one in the family. And also homes. And so new suburbs came into being. You see, with the GI Bill of Rights, new suburbs came into being. Suburbs in the olden days were where the very rich lived. People lived in the cities, except the farmers who had a hard time during the Depression. But the suburbs were for the rich. But then came Park Forest in Chicago, Levittown, New York, the GI Bill. And so a whole suburban world came into being that outnumbered the city people. And as a result, to some extent, of the GI Bill. And these kids, something happened to these kids who now had homes. They became middle class, see. And so, in a sense, they were denying their own background to a great extent, too. That's all part of it, all part of the one package. So that's the period during which I lived. So here I am, this artifact.
Where is there a place now for these people to be heard in their views and their opinions on affairs?
So that's one of the problems. How can they be heard? I think there should be. This is my revolutionary approach to TV. There should be every week a program called Soapbox, something like it, in which anybody can speak, wacko or not. Anyone. I think we've been accustomed to processed. We have processed foods, don't we? The processed foods rather than, the processed tomatoes, God. You look for a tomato that has a taste, We have processed thought as well. We have 30-second sound bites. We have people who are good. These anchor people, by the way, are very good people. But they simply, forgive me, read the news. Or they offer an opinion. But basically it's the same. And it's processed thought. So whereas the fresh food that we're looking for, and fresh food for thought, it's from the voice of the people themselves, telling of their lives and experiences. And I would devote a lot of time. Public service, I mean real honest to God public. Remember radio originally, radio going back. Herbert Hoover was president, and Hoover said, the air belongs to the public. I'm talking about Herbert Hoover now, not Franklin D. He said the air belongs to the public, and of course public service came to being later on thanks to an FCC commissioner, remember named Clifford Durr in the Roosevelt days. And there was something called the Blue Book, which says there's got to be some, we know how public service programs now, 3 o'clock in the morning, or now and then we have them, But of course there should be air, let ordinary, I hate that word ordinary, but let the non-celebrated people be heard. All my books, by the way, with a few exceptions, have been about the non-celebrated people, those who make the world go round. Like Bertolt Brecht, we know him best because Louis Armstrong sings Mac the Knife. That's from Threepenny Opera. Bertolt Brecht was also a poet. And he wrote a poem about this very thing. Who built these things? Like, if I would ask somebody a question, who built the pyramids? They say the pharaohs. Pharaohs didn't lift a finger. It was anonymous slaves through the centuries who built it. Mrs. Pharaoh's fingernails were as immaculate as Elizabeth Taylor and Cleopatra. No. Who built the 7 gates of Thebes, asks the poet Brecht. Who carried those crags of stone from one place to another? When the Chinese wall was built, where did the masons go for lunch? See, when Caesar conquered Gaul, was there not even a cook in the army? And here's the big one. When the Armada sank, the Spanish Armada, I remember getting that in classroom, Miss O'Brien, McLaren School, 1588 was the year. I remember that, like 1492. Sir Francis Drake conquered the Spanish Armada. He did. by himself, Sir Francis Drake. When the Armada sank, Brecht says, we read that King Philip wept, King of Spain. And he asked, were there no other tears? In a sense, what I try in these books is to the lives of those who shed those other tears, those anonymous people down through the centuries. So what I do is nothing new. In the introduction you said, made oral history on. Oral history was here long before the printed word. What I do, I have a tape recorder in my hand, which is interesting. I'm worried about too much technology. That's my own worry. We can talk about that later. Very worried about the runaway technology we're having. But nonetheless, I made my living on the radio. I use a telephone, on television, and I use a typewriter as far as I'll go. So here we are.
Let's flash back now to the early Studs circle. Everyone assumes you're Mr. Chicago, but I understand you were born in the Bronx. Is that correct?
Yeah, came when I was 8 years old with the family. My father was ill, and Uncle lent us some money for a rooming house, and then came the hotel. So I came in 1920, 8 years old. I was born in 1912. The year the Titanic went down, I came up, you know. I was at the Titanic. So I'm a Titanic baby. And came in 1920. And I lost my asthma. I had asthma in New York. I lost it here because that stockyards wind blowing north from the south side did it. And that rooming house also was a place of education for me too. It was in the Cook County Hospital. Young nurses lived there and interns before they had nursing schools. No, they had them, but a lot of them lived there. Different sorts of people. The rooming house was always like Thomas Wolfe's like Homeward Angel, because his mother, called Eliza in the book, ran a boarding house in Asheville, and my mother, Annie, ran a rooming house in Chicago. So I always saw myself as the boy, Eugene Gant, with Thomas Wolfe. I liked that book so much because I saw the parallel. I mean, and then Chicago became my city. I've been here ever since. That's 80 years ago.
Obviously, you were influenced a lot by books, and I understand. Is it true that James T. Farrell's books?
Oh yeah, well, Studs Lonigan.
But tell us about how does Studs come about? That's not your real name.
My name is Louis, L-O-U-I-S, and I was in a play. This is when I was during the Depression again. I didn't want to practice law, and I blocked that out of my mind anyway. And so I joined this theater group by accident. I had a governmental job. Not WPA before. I was on the WPA Writers Project. That helped me become a writer. But this is before that, and acting in soap operas and all. And so I carried Studs Lonigan with me. I love that. It was a trilogy. A young man that is Studs Lonigan and Judgment Day. But Studs Lonigan, a Chicago South Side kid whose life was wasted. Could have been just wasted. So they called me Studs. Well, once it got me in trouble. And I always say, I wish it were the way people think it was, but it wasn't. You know, Studs. You know, it got me to because I was doing a book author lecture. I think in Atlanta, and this librarian missed it. And she wrote me a note from Atlanta. A librarian says, "The life of a librarian is not very exciting, but it has its piquant moments, such as the one I experienced recently. There's a man working for me as a volunteer, but he's a spy for Jerry Falwell and Donald Wildman. You know, he's spying on me to see that I don't carry what they consider pornographic books. And he said, Miss Cooper," this is a librarian writing me. This man says to me, "Miss Cooper, a request has come for a book. I think you've put it in that I consider pornographic. A subscriber called, librarian wants that book. I said, we won't carry that book, it's pornographic." She says, "Well, what's the name of the book?" "I believe it's called Working Studs by Terkel." And that's when I knew I had a bestseller. Anyway, but that's how I got the name, Studs Lonigan.
Let's go back to the earlier days of Chicago radio and television. Tell us about Studs Place in your early...
This was a certain moment. First, there was a radio in Chicago. I was a gangster in radio soap operas. And that's the role I always played, gangster. And Ma Perkins. And this is preface to the television beginnings. Chicago was the home of most of the soap operas, more than New York, far more than Hollywood. I was on Ma Perkins. And then Woman in White was about a nurse. The Guiding Light was about a minister. All the strips are basically the same. There were three gangsters in all of them. You know, malevolent figures are coming out. I was one of the three, the dumb one. There was the bright one, the middle one, I was the dumb one. The guy said, "Get in there, you guys," or "Mother of God, is this the end?" I stole something from Edward G. Robinson, Little Caesar. And then comes TV. Well, then I was a disc jockey for a while. Had a cult program. We play opera, play jazz, play folk music, and had a sort of cult following. And Dave Garraway was the top jazz jockey in town. So we knew each other very well. And then TV comes along. And there's an early program with the wonderful genius of Chicago, Bert Tillstrom, Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. In his hands, for the first time people at home saw a genius at work. In his hands, little rags who became people. Kukla, Ollie, Miss Beulah the Witch. And he developed his own magic world, the Kuklapolitan, the world of tenderness and wit and gentleness. And that was a program, it was a new one. Gave Garraway then easygoing quality about him, how they call Garraway at Large. They recognized TV as new, so if a chair fell down, it fell down. No one rushed to pick it up. And they would pick up the chair. And the third program I was involved with was called Stud's Place. People speak of Cheers and other things. It was not quite. Stud's Place was a restaurant, sort of, in the neighborhood that I ran.
Hey, Grace, look now, will you talk to Louie about some bouillabaisse? We've got different cuisine, huh?
Fancy taste,
When
huh?
you kid, yeah, and look,
What are we
this-
going to use for finger bowls?
All right,
a cream
all
of
right.
wheat dish?
Listen, no sarcasm, please, huh? The silverware. Will you bring that stuff that shines?
Did you ever see
huh?
such a sudden change
Listen,
come over a
kid.
guy?
One trip out and a guy turns pro. He's about as subtle as a cry for help. Let's get out of here.
Listen, kid, and don't show him the menu, will you? Don't
Oh,
show
we
him.
know
I
what we're
want
going to have
see
to eat.
that.
If we don't.
Bonsoir, Monsieur Studs.
There was an actress named Beverly Younger playing the waitress. Now, she had worked theater much of her life, and she worked stock companies who would travel from town to town, and she met waitresses. See, until she came along, the waitress was a gum-chewing Brooklynese, you know, the stereotype. She saw the waitresses in these diners, women of certain mother wit, intelligence, maybe not well-read, but intelligent, and she played Gracie, the waitress. I had a friend named Win Strachey, as a guy I knew who happened to be a singer, who sang lieder, who sang operas, who sang folk songs, who sang labor songs, and he was a handyman, self-educated. And there was the piano player, Chet Roble, who represented the city, sort of bluesy, at 2 o'clock in the morning shows. And we were the four of this restaurant. And people, now and then an actor would come in, playing themselves. So we wrote our own script. I said, that is Charlie Andrews, I mentioned before, who conceived the Garraway show, conceived this one.
Was it a drama or was it?
It was a drama. Oh,
yeah.
no, it was a weekly drama.
Yeah, okay.
Every week something happened, but that something, people still think there was a Stud's Place. You see, it would say at the end, dialogue by the cast. See, Charlie and I would meet on a Monday with a plot line, just a plot line. And then the cast would go over their own lines. And how we wound up on time, I'll never know. The director was named Dan Petrie. He'd be worth seeing. He's now a movie director, Dan Petrie. He was the director of that thing. And so what it was, it's not unremoved from the stuff I've done later. These ordinary guy would come in, Willie Polifka, he was it's a Bohemian name. He's a Bohemian actor, too, a Bohemian actor. George Caesar, that's the name for soup, I think. Well, he and his girl have been engaged for years. What are you going to do with mother? His mother's the widow, and the big house. What are we going to do about her? See, some plots of that sort. So people thought that actually was, years after the show went off, years after it went off, I'd be stopped in the street. What happened to Stud's Place? And for a long time, we thought there was such a place. They actually believed there was a place. That was John Crosby's column. Crosby was a preeminent TV critic of the
Herald Tribune in New York, yeah.
Carried in the cities. And he was saying of that program, that's as close to life as you could possibly get, yet you know it's not real, yet you think it is. Well, that was TV then. Remember, TV then was not the sales medium it is. Now we come to the big one. TV was still frontier country. Chicago was a frontier. And so it was in the hands of the writer, the director, and the actor, the creative spirits, so-called. The guy in the gray flannel suit was not yet there, you see. Or however there was, see, the marketing was not that kind of word to use those days. So then it became, when Dave Garraway appeared on the Today Show, Today was the very first program ever seen in the daytime. Remember, we were on at night. TV was 6 to 10 at night. No one ever thought of TV in the daytime until a man named Pat Weaver did, who was for the NBC. I say to the kids, Pat Weaver, you can only describe and say, well, he's the father of Sigourney Weaver. Then they'll know, see. But Pat Weaver conceived the idea of a daytime, and it's called Today. Well, who? Only one person could possibly be the guy. That easygoing guy from Chicago who had sort of a Rooseveltian manner, you know, glasses high, and Dave was a natural for it. And then the mail started coming in, and then, boom, it changed. It became the hot sales medium. And then later on came the sound bites and the overwhelming number of commercials we get, more and more and more. I noticed one thing, that the commercials, I think, are even better produced. I hear it clearer than the feature itself. That's interesting, I think. Well, Stud's place is very hot. Dave is now in New York, and Mike Wallace was here. He went to New York, of course. And Bart Tuss was, I was courted too. In fact, courted by a man named Sonny Werblin, who was the head of MCA, he founded the American Football League. Well, the Jets and Joe Namath, that's his. He wanted to be my manager. I don't know, I guess okay. They said, there's a John Crosby column somewhere that said, he's a young Spencer Tracy, something like it. Anyway. So anyway, but then things popped. I had signed many petitions. I never met a petition I didn't like, you know. And so I signed a petition anti-Jim Crow before the word civil rights came forth. This was the 50s, early 50s. Anti-poll tax, friendship with the Soviet Union. It was only 5 years after the war, and they lost 20 million on our side. Well, stuff of that sort. And then so a guy comes in from New York, and they gather around me, the group from Chicago, and they say, gee, Studs, you're a valuable property. I love that word, property. Yeah, valuable property. But we got to do something about this. Did you sign all these things? I says, yeah. Well, do you know the communists started these things? And that's when I get smart. That's when I said, well, suppose communists come out for cancer. Do I have to come out against cancer? Well, nobody laughed. The guy said, it's not very funny, you know. And finally they said, why don't you just say you were duped, you were stupid, you didn't mean it. And to this day, people say, oh, Studs, you were so heroic. They don't know what they're talking about. I was scared crapless. But my ego was at stake. It's my ego, my vanity. Prevented me from saying I was dumb, I was stupid. No, I'm not. And so that's what did it. But my name never appeared. You see, so I was black in the trade. The Chicago public didn't know it. They know, but of course the reporters were friends of mine, and they want to report that. But it was known in the trade, so I couldn't get work. But my name did not appear, by the way. There's a book called Red Channels, which is kind of rather obscene thing put out, naming anybody who may have been, anybody who was a friend of, anybody who was rumored to have been. They're all blacklisted. If you're not named, you're dead. I look for my name by this time. You know, I think I'm going to be in it. People I admire are in it. Zero Mostel, Arthur Miller, they're in it. Why not me? And I looked for my name, and I wasn't in it. I thought it was New York parochialism that did it. I felt like a blue-haired dowager who didn't make the social register. Well, then I worked, and then I heard this radio station. I wasn't working for a while. Getting $100 or so for a lecture here and there. And then I heard this radio, WFMT. It was an FM radio station. And I hear music, wonderful classical music. We don't have a classical station. And I hear a Woody Guthrie song, Woody Guthrie. Well, no one played Woody Guthrie in Chicago except me. When I had that show called The Wax Museum that had a cult following I told you about earlier. I called up and I said, hey, I'd like to work for you guys. They knew of me. I was known in town. They said, well, we'd be delighted, but we're flat broke. I said, well, I am too, so we start even. That was 45. I'd worked there 45 years. And that's when interviewing came into play. Without my meaning to, it just came into play, you know. Somebody would call and say, you should do more of that. Because I was really a disc jockey. I came on doing jazz, the same music I did there. And then I interviewed Bud Freeman, a jazz saxophonist whom I knew, and Richard Dyer Bennett, a singer whom I knew. And then the woman calls us, you know, you should do more of those things. It's different than anybody else. Why is that? It's as though I'm hearing an actual, as though I'm eavesdropping, and I'm hearing an actual conversation. It's not processed, in other words. And so from then on, I interviewing, and that's a publisher named Andre Schifrin called me one day. He saw some of my interviews in a magazine that our station owned. And he read these interviews. And he called up and he says, how about you do a book about Chicago, about an American city with people are talking, the way you have these people talking. And that's how it began. The first book was called Division Street America. And then it went on to the books you've named and others. So basically, it's accidental, all this stuff.
You've interviewed literally thousands of people.
Thousands.
In those years.
I must finish that on a good note, that blacklisting thing. Mahalia Jackson always said that I was the white disc jockey who brought her to the attention of white America. I don't know if so or not, but I would say to some extent it's true, because African Americans, a great many knew her, but the whites didn't. So I hear a record one day called Move On Up a Little Higher. It's an old 78 RPM in a record shop. And I played this almost every week, Mahalia's voice doing other gospel songs written by a man named Professor Thomas Dorsey for her. Precious Lord, Take My Hand came right out with, that was Martin Luther King's favorite song. And so Mahalia is attributing all this to me, and she's now internationally known. And on CBS, going to put on a CBS radio network show with Mahalia Jackson. And she says, I want Studs Terkel to be the writer and the host of that show. And they said, who? And they heard of me, and the other way. She says, are you sure? He says, well, that's it. It's my show. So we're doing it. It has a live audience, at the Wrigley Building, seats about 400 people. Radio shows, some of the shows had live audiences, like Mr. First Nighter did at night, and you pretend it's, and people come to see Mahalia, and it's 7 o'clock Chicago time, I think 8 o'clock New York time on Fridays, if I remember right, network. So we're on 3-4 weeks, and it's going pretty well when a guy appears on stage during dress rehearsal, when the audience is not yet allowed in. Just this guy from New York last time, came for NBC, this time at CBS. He says, Studs or Mr. Terkel, would you sign this? It's just pro forma. And it's a loyalty oath thing for me. So I said, this is for me only? Yeah. I said, well, I'm honored, but no, I don't believe in that stuff. That is where you been? No, I don't do that thing. It's me, you take my word and that's it. And he said, well, you have to. And our voice is raised a little. Mahalia's passing by to go to the piano to work with Mildred Falls, the accompanist. And she knows about me. She says, is that what I think it is, baby? She says to me in passing. I say, yeah. You going to sign it? I says, no. Well, okay, let's rehearse. He says, Miss Jackson, Mr. Terkel has to sign this, has to come. He doesn't have to do anything he doesn't want to do. She says, you tell Mr. Big, whoever it is, if they fire Studs, to find another Mahalia Jackson. You know what happened? Nothing. He vanished. We finished 26 weeks, whatever it was. Nothing. The moral is, Mahalia had more guts and they're more American in her little finger than, may I say it, Bill Paley, General Sarnoff, and a whole bunch of ads guys and network guys all put together. Nobody said no. The emperor had no clothes. So that's the moral of the whole thing. So then I went back in action with the books and everything else. And so here I am, for better or for worse.
Well, let's go through a few of your books right now and see how how your broadcasting affected some of them and vice versa. In '74, you did a book called Working. Tell us about how that came about.
Well, that's the third book. You see, the first is about what is it like to live in Chicago, Division Street America. The second book was Hard Times, about what's it like to live in the Great American Depression. What's it like to be that kid whose old man's coming home then? Or to be on relief, as it was called back in those days. What's it like to be one of those marches? Or what's it like to get a job on the WPA, the government stepping in? That's big. See, in those days, today we hear about big government. The very ones whose daddies and granddaddies' asses were saved by the big government, ones who most condemn it. For example, Ronnie Reagan's father wasn't working in Dixon, Illinois. He got a job on the WPA. But by God, you got a guy saying too much big government, you see. So one of the reasons, well, I think these books are of some importance, even though I'm unconnected with them, self-serving, is that history has been denied the young. As though we're suffering from a national Alzheimer's disease. There's no memory of yesterday. So when someone's big government, it was the New Deal of FDR that saved these very guys with the SEC and other matters of that sort, you see. that saved what we call the free market today. It fell on its fanny. Remember the headline of Variety, which is the trade entertainment world, was Wall Street lays an egg. That was the headline. And the man I went to visit while working on Hard Times in the 70s was like Greenspan. He was a senior partner at Goldman Sachs, advisor to Truman, I think, and to Kennedy and Johnson. And I said, what happened when the crash occurred, the big crash of 1929 that set off the Depression of 10 years? He said, I don't know. I don't know. He said, the ticker tape is going all night. John D. Jr. is buying thousands of shares of common stock. Down it goes. Guys are jumping out of windows. We waited for some kind of an announcement. And I said, from whom? From God? Well, the announcement came from the government. And so that's the thing we may be witnessing again in a different way. So then came working. And my publisher, again, Andre Schiffer, said, how about what people do all day? You see, we have a lot of books about the two prime impulses of the human being. Freud said, Liebe und Arbeit, love and work, meaning sex and work. Well, there are plenty of books about sex, too many, right? We know more than we need to know. But hardly anything about what we do all day, and that's how working came into being. Into seeing this one guy who was in that Great American Dream Machine, and he opens the book to show he's a working man who actually has these thoughts, bitterness in him. He's a laborer already at the steel plant. And he reads down the kids and says, you read? Some college kid says to me, why, something wrong with my reading? Oh, but wow. Yeah, you want to talk about some of the books? And so a salesman, a school teacher, a spot welder, a small businessman, farmer, of course. And what was the work like? Well, what's your day? What is your day like? What do you do when you get up in the morning? The book was so one guy, and now when you find the humor, a guy was a gas meter reader. You know, a man comes with a flashlight, goes into the basement to read the gas meter. He says, oh boy, it gets so boring. Well, there are two things in my life, dogs and women. So let's talk about the dogs first. And by the way, first is reality, second was fantasy. And so the dogs, you come in and the damn dog bites at you, like a mailman oftentimes has the same experience. And so I have my flashlight, I want to smack that dog. Ladies, what are you doing hitting my dog? I said, ladies, he's eating my leg off, you know. So I go downstairs following the lady down the stairs to the basement, had a little dog in front of me, and I kicked that dog to make up for the one I missed outside. And then finally I said, let's talk about women. Well, it hasn't happened yet, but who knows? Like sometimes in the suburbs, you go there, and there's a young woman in the household. She's very pretty, you know, and she's laying in the sunshine in the patio outside on a blanket in her bikini on her front, you know, laying her back to the sun to get the sun, and the bra is unbuttoned. The bra is loose, so I creep up very slowly, and I holler, gas man, and she turns around. And he says, I get bawled out an awful lot, and they bawl me out, but it makes the day go faster.
Do you think broadcasting, radio and television in general, have been helping to unite the country or keep the divide going?
Well, neither. I think neither. It can. See, TV itself is a fantastic medium. And I hear about cable TV and access radio. That's interesting and hopeful. More and more channels are opening. At the same time, who's buying these channels? There we go again, you see. The big problem is, let's be specific now. General Electric owns NBC. Now, Brokaw is a good man. But suppose there was a scandal involving General Electric gypping the public. And Brokaw comes on and brings it. He's out on his Tegucigalpa tomorrow. Now, CBS is owned by Westinghouse, and Dan Rather, who's a good man, is there. He's saying, here's what Westinghouse did yesterday. Let me tell you about it. Boom! You know. ABC is owned by Disney. Well, now, Disneyland's a big scam, Peter Jennings is about to say. I'll tell you about the scam it is, how the young are taken by it. Boom. So you see, we're more and more and more, and then you talk about Fox and Murdoch. Well, then you come close to obscenity in my book, you see. Murdoch has become almost a metaphor for it, you see. And so more and more control, less and less control, more, not just in TV, it's in publishing, it's in everything. Read about Murder Each Day. You also read about layoffs each day. They call layoffs now, they were called downsizing before. We love euphemisms, you know. And so I would say both. TV played a tremendous role in the civil rights movement, affirmative role, great role. First time people saw the dogs of Bull Connor leaping or at the bridge at Selma. First time the hose and the kids, the courage. So TV in the civil rights movement played a great role, and to some extent in Vietnam, despite the commenter, to some extent. But generally speaking, nowhere nearly what it could play, and negative to a great extent too. So it's both. When it comes to race, it's a combination. There's no question, a new middle class, a new black middle class has emerged, a new class that does quite well. But that's the minority of the great many. That's why the attack on affirmative action. You had your chance, and that's it. And you see, my father didn't own it. My parents didn't own these slaves. Why should I be? Whereas a southern white guy named Ben Hensley, I mean, of course I benefited from it. My father didn't came nowhere near a slave. I benefited because this old guy was teaching me how to be this truck driver. The old black guy was, and when I got to be good, they canned him, and he became my assistant. I became a truck driver. Of course I benefited from it. Being white by the very nature made you benefit, whether you owned slaves or not. Well, anyway, that's under attack. We know that, and we have a president, not elected, but president nonetheless, it's accepted by many, you see, because, again, we have this general Alzheimer's disease. No, this new class is there, but for the great majority, it may be even worse because you had your chance, you see.
Is there any room for moral values when it's driven by those prerogatives?
Does it sell? That's the question, see. Does it sell? Became, ever since you go back to the Today Show, which was revolutionary, when it began to sell. Whether moral values, then you start talking almost old school teacher talk, you know. Moral values means learning to behave decently, see. People tell me, why'd you get in trouble? Well, I thought of this great Catholic woman named Dorothy Day, who found Catholic work, Dorothy Day. She could have had a nice, easy life, but she didn't. She protested, had a rough life, but she formed this group called Catholic Worker. And she says, I said, what are you working? I interviewed her, by the way, for the Depression book. And I remember at this place in New York. I said, what is it you're looking for? I forget. And she says, what kind of world do you like? And she says, I'm dreaming of a world in which it will be easier for people to behave decently. Now that's it. That's my theme. Easier for people to behave decently. It's so simple. And to make it easier means a job, a buck or two in your pocket to get a break when it comes to work or whatever it is, decently. Those who have big amounts of dough should give their share when it comes to tax, you know, whatever it might be. And so in a sense, that what TV could do that, I don't mean all people are Bill Moyers, these are special shows, but I mean in the daily shows, for example. In doing your daily shows, immediately we see that face, and it's very often black, a crime committed, boom. It could be white too, but nonetheless it's there. Is that the big news of Chicago at that moment, or is that the most attention-grabbing marketing news? Marketing, as a market is a new word. We have a new religion, it's called free marketry, you know. We're going to privatize everything. We were privatizing, almost everything was privatized when the Depression came along in the 30s, you know. The government played a little role. The government, until Roosevelt came along, played no role in our city's life except the postmaster. Then it stepped in, benignly, intervened. He had to, because free marketry fell on its fanny. And so we're back again wildly doing it. I don't know what's going to happen 4 years from now. But the whole subject of the role of TV, and that is naturally woeful in that respect. It can be. Now and then you have a pretty good one, you know, once in a while. But in the main, what's important in our lives, you know? And immediately have this crime thing, immediately. I know it's got to be dealt with, but is that it? And every station carries the same thing. Invariably they're the same. And you turn on one as a commercial line, turn out, and the other's got the commercial on. And it's as almost each one is competing for the same low common denominator. I don't want to use that phrase, the dumbing down. I hate that phrase because people are not dumb. They're considered dumb. were played for dumb, but were not dumb. That I found out doing these books. And so there is an intelligence there. It's a native, and it need not be a well-read person, but a person who thinks. And when Tom Paine wrote Common Sense, he was, by the way, read by thousands, would be millions today. He wasn't talking about free America. He was about free, thoughtful America. A citizen is not just someone who's freedom to speak. A citizen is thoughtful, and that's what it's about. And TV does not appeal to that, with notable exceptions.
What you're referring to is the fact, unfortunately, that so much of television and radio these days is based on imitation. What has worked before, continuing. But let's go back to the Chicago School, as it was called, the Chicago School of Broadcasting and whatnot. What was the environment that gave, well, what was it, number one, and then what was the environment that...
Well, remember, the whole medium, television, was brand new. It was a new invention, like the phonograph and the voice of Caruso. When you think of the phonograph, you think of Caruso, of course. Immigrant families, not only Italian, all of them, would buy Caruso records. The telephone, TV, radio itself, and then the voice of FDR, when radio was in its prime. FDR was the master of that, because his fireside chat, the phrase fireside chat, has an intimate quality. And FDR's voice was not a man on the street voice, it was a Dutch patroon voice. However, he says, my friends, it could have been my friend, singular, you see, because he's addressing that farmer, or that couple, or that old man, or that old woman, or that family. He's addressing the small unit, individuals. He's talking to me. So that's what Dave Garroway had that quality, you see. And one person. And so it was a brand new medium, and so we're free. Chicago was like a frontier country in a frontier medium, television. And so when it's frontier means, boy, your imagination is called upon. And so it was.
If you were in possession of a magic wand, how would you transform broadcasting so that more of the American voice could be heard and become truly an instrument of social change?
Well, I'd open it up first, the role of money, the role of big boys, control, the role of control. I think there should be blue ribbon committees, blue ribbon mean of the communities, community people, in all communities of the country, represented communities, local programs, start with the local programs. And so a community spokesman representing them. That's one, I'm thinking out loud now. Here's a tremendous medium comes into the home, most powerful ever thus far for transforming, for thought. We know the TV news, when the newspaper's having a hard time, we know that. There has to be some programming that is not conducive toward commercial, not conducive toward does it sell. The air belongs to the public to take that seriously. Quoting Herbert Hoover, Republican President of the United States at the time of one Great Depression. It's ours. So now let's have representatives, white, black, poor, rich, well-to-do, or all this, equal time for all of them. Somehow a big block each day, so they get some of that. Never mind many cable shows. Now we know more and more cable stuff's being taken over by the few anyway. We know that. I'd say that's the big one. The openness, to be open. And the key is the air belongs to the public. That means not only radio air, but television air as well. You start with that. And as far as commentators are concerned, I'd have everybody have a commentator. Everybody could be a commentator, as I'm trying to say. Sure, there's the principal of a school. Sure, there's somebody more well-read than the other. But I think, basically, I think that's what Thomas Paine had in mind in the very beginning, he and the other guys. And it was that aspect of thoughtful, to be open. So the program, the word access, I guess, we hear that a lot, it should be open rather. It's closed right now. It's closed. It's open the windows. That's about it.
For a man who is so much in love with life and what you call the preciousness of living, why have you done a book on death?
Because it's about life. Because life is finite. People think I did it because my wife, married 60 years, those are her pictures there, died. No, I started that before. However, I won't deny that her death played a role in my being involved with it. See, we never talk about, every doctor I meet, doctors I admire and all say, you've got to do that book. See, we only talk about death when someone dear is in a coma, about dying, there's guilt and there's grief. Talk about it while we're alive, because life is finite. And so, what about it? Do you believe in this? Do you believe in that? Or what are your thoughts about life? What is your memory? You think? And people open up, and people want to talk about it. People first, I was told that people want to talk. They just can't help. They just start talking. I got more mail now than ever because of this one, more than any of the other books. See, it's also about life. The name of the book is Will the Circle Be Unbroken? That's an old hymn that's sung by the Carter family. And Doc Watson is in the book. He sings that. But the subtitle is Reflections on Death and Hunger for a Faith. We're hungry for a faith of some sort. Doesn't have to be religious, just a faith. Because you never, never, never will see that person again, says Lear, as he carries Cordelia in his arms in Shakespeare. At the same time, you got these people singing out these songs. It's a better life, a better world awaiting. Well, it's not about that world. It's about this world, you see, that I'm talking about. I'm not in any way putting down the thoughts of other people who have had other body experiences or believe in reincarnation. That's their right. If it gives them solace, fine. No one really knows, do we? But as Fats Waller would say, one never knows, do one? You know. And so, is there or is there ain't? We don't know, do we? So let people think their wishes, but also it's primarily about the preciousness of life. That's what it's really about.
You've been quoted as saying that chances are that this is your last book.
Well, I said, well, I'm 88. It goes with the territory, you know. It may not be. I got another book in mind I started called The Listener. See, the last book was The Spectator, about these actors and directors I told you about. Now, what about the musical people I've had? It's got on it that I have in this forthcoming book will be Lotta Lehman, the great leader singer of our century, and her accompanist, Andre Scovia, as well as Lil Hardin Armstrong in the early days of Louis, you see, as well as Earl Hines. As well as John Jacob Niles, a very eccentric guy who wrote I Wonder As I Wander Out Under the Sky. That carol people think is medieval. It's his. And he's kind of a very flaky, wonderful guy. And so I'm working on that after this is over. So I'll cross out that parenthesis. Maybe my last book. No, I got several more.
Would you say it's the most alive book you've ever done? And
the most alive book I've done is this one about death.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it starts out with Tommy Gates, my favorite. He's the one, I called him Tommy Patrick in a previous book. He closes working, a fireman in life, and he's wonderful. And his brother Bob, who's a cop in New York. And it opens with Tommy Gates. He says, I get out of that fire and that smoke, and I just taste that beer. And then my father's dying. I knew his father, Harold Gates, who worked for the Union, a longshoreman union. He fought the thugs and everything. And he's tough guy, but he's got colon cancer and is dying. He's down to, God knows, 90 pounds. And he says, it's driving us crazy. The old man gets up and puffs a Camel cigarette every now and then and put that. But this time I'm falling asleep on the cot next to him, and I hear him take a deep gasp. I guess that's it, his silence. I'm going to fall asleep. I'll tell the family in the morning that finally old Pop is, gone. And suddenly starts breathing again. Son of a bitch! He says, I love my old man, Studs, but I was pissed. You see, now, that's the kind of stuff you have in the book. People say things they wouldn't dream of saying. But of course, see, he loves the old man. So that's the kind of stuff in the book throughout. And so it's about all that. And you got the heroism of gays and lesbians and the AIDS thing. It's absolutely fantastic, the caregiving and memories, and so war and all these aspects of it. So it's a very live book. Oh yeah, I feel very good about it.
You've written about death, certainly, and finally, how would you summarize your attitude toward life?
You see, here's the thing. Every book I've done until this one has been about experiences people have had, right? What's it like to be that kid or that woman in the Great Depression, or a woman having a job in a defense plant during World War II, or a kid at the front, or a conscientious objector. What's it like to have this sort of job, daily job every day? What's it like to be white or black? every book has that experience about what's it like growing old, coming of age. What's the one experience all of us are going, no, none of us have had, but all of us are going to have? Well, so what greater challenge than that? So it's a challenge. You know, why am I doing it? Well, Hillary was asked, why are you climbing Everest? Well, it's there. It's there. And so this right here you chose, that's going to be my back cover. I like that. It's sort of Beckett, it's sort of whatever Godot, but there I'm going that way. I didn't mean it, but this was done before a reference to the book came about. It's a Skrymnesky thing. But that's it, that's me. I'm saying, listen, or I'm listening.
What are future textbooks going to say about Studs Terkel?
God, I don't know what they're going to say. I suppose, I don't know what they're going to say. I suppose they'll say oral histories, basically. Lives of ordinary people ordinary is the wrong word. Lives of the non-celebrated people, much like his mother and father and all the others who keep the wheels going around. Basically, trying to capture the voices of the voiceless, who always have been there, always will be. Something like that, I suppose. I hope so. Keeps me going. So I'm going to get a cigar right now, and after this is over, I will have the cigar and start fooling around with this introduction, and then we'll call it a day.